Chapter 22, TINTINNABULATION. 4th Arc, Washington. (22) TINTINNABULATION. In recognition of her service, in which she exceeded the expectations of her superiors and displayed intelligence, loyalty, and leadership against the enemies of the empire, Hedgewish received a promotion. Cicero's soldiers applauded and congratulated. Higher-ranked ones shook her hand. The informal ceremony took place in the lobby of a Cincinnati motel requisitioned as a military command center. A graying-haired motel owner filmed them via smartphone, like weren't they just the darndest kids. Privately, after she dismissed the soldiers to their various tasks, Cicero approached Hedgewish.
"I understand you managed far better than Joliet would have."
Her face resolved into perfect emotionlessness.
"That's no excuse. 3 survivors out of 21. You ought to be hanged."
Hedgewish imagined her own face looked much like Cicero's.
"Probably, milady." "It's good you recognize that. I have no authority to contest your promotion, but I can ensure you wear it better. Attend me tomorrow as we conquer this city and I'll show you true leadership."
Okay. A sham promotion anyway. Her official rank switched from
junior administrator to administrator.
She remained tangential to the traditional chain of command and she gained no seniority over anyone to whom she was not already senior. Her direct superior remained the senior administrator, aka the handmaiden. All that changed was that Hedgewish now had access to documents which had been previously classified. These included files on the centurions and their lieutenants, including ex-centurion DuPage, Denver's papers, and stuffy financial documents. Obviously, they only gave her this promotion because she had witnessed firsthand the abilities of all 4 centurions and was the current caretaker of Denver's papers. They didn't really think what she did in Chicago was intelligent or brave. They only needed a pretense to bestow upon her knowledge she already knew. Joliet, meanwhile, they called to meet the Empress personally. When the order came, Joliet looked like she would have rather died to the Archon. Nonetheless, 2 hours after the fighting ended, a private helicopter landed and some powerful magical girls Hedgewish recognized from Cook's platoon escorted Joliet into it. Dr. Cho and her homunculi never showed up again, even after the fighting ended. Alongside Clown Muffle and Palos, they were listed as missing in action. As for Hedgewish and the other survivor, Midlothian, they were instructed to remain with Cicero. Midlothian officially became a member of the platoon, while Hedgewish was designated a non-combat observer. The girls in the colony of Milwaukee were shifted to hold Chicago, but it was a skeleton force and it became clear the Empress had little interest in maintaining the city itself. Everything in it that mattered now rested in an attaché case chained to Hedgewish's hip. She also carried the 3 soul gems Palos salvaged before things became truly crazy. But the bodies had assuredly been destroyed in the whirlpool. Even if they hadn't, it would be impossible to locate them, unlike the grief cubes, which Cicero's platoon easily recovered from the yachts Flotsam and Jetsam on account of their buoyant containers. In addition to the cubes dropped by the Archon, the Empire of Chicago held a weighty reserve, which Cicero's soldiers transported in the cargo bay of the bus they used to trek cross-country. Hedgewish tried to imagine being a corpseless soul, trapped in a shiny stone. Incapable of speech, signals, or any sensation. Sometimes she imagined the gems cried out to her, not exactly telepathy but some kind of empathic transfer of emotion. Their despair burgeoned. What hope might they have? For all they knew, they were still sunken at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Grief cubes had little effect. In her motel room, which she shared with Lieutenant Berwin, she placed the gems atop the dresser. Makina and Munster would surely go tonight. Tinley might last another day. She hoped they went while she slept.
"Paperwork tonight, Lady Hedgewish?"
asked Berwin, back propped on 4 frumpy pillows and owl eyeglasses focused on a book. Christine de Pizin's book of the City of Ladies, what else?
"What else?"
said Hedgewish. She had to sift Denver's papers and inform not only Cicero but also Cook and Aurora about the magical girls they might fight in the next city they tried to conquer.
It is your job after all. I do not envy you, dear lady, not one whit."
She licked a finger and turned a page. "You'll die soon," Hedgewish thought. If she had to guess, she'd say all of them would die soon. The whole thing was coming apart. The next morning all 3 soul gems were gone. Tinley hadn't lasted longer after all. Maybe Madoka realized the hopelessness and saved herself the effort of a return trip. Cincinnati. A city with more character in its name than its layout or architecture. Cicero's platoon moved at dawn, after a silent vigil for the 3 comrades cycled in the night. The plan was to locate and incapacitate the local girls while they slept. Cicero had 2 girls with magic tracking abilities, less sophisticated than Paulos's radar, but serviceable. They tracked girls to slums, to hostels, one even to a nice neighborhood. They caught one walking to her elementary school, a 5th grader. She sobbed when Cicero's squads encircled her. Of the 7 girls in the area, they apprehended 5 bloodlessly. 2 others, more veteran, tried some crazy stuff, but Cicero's platoon overwhelmed them. It helped that Denver compiled fairly complete records of the girls in the area, but Hedgewish had to admit, Cicero knew what the fuck to do. Nobody on either side received an injury worse than a broken arm, quickly healed. Yeah. Maybe Hedgewish could learn something. Now that Denver only existed as a pile of papers in her attaché case. Now that thoughts of Hazel Crest and Calumet and all those other girls kept crowding in. Now that it was far too late and her worthless life had entered overtime, past the point it reasonably ought to have ended. Yet it was a solace. The military exactitude, the rigorous discipline, the little rituals of rank. The stuff she scoffed at prior. It held a meaning now, she understood its purpose, because these people dealt in life and death and if a millimeter could save their life they ought to work in millimeters. Cicero, Lakeisha Cabwe, 16. She contracted at 9, and originated, coincidentally, in this very city, Cincinnati, a pugnacious brat by all accounts. There was only one account, her personal file, in the attaché case, who wished for a pony, not because she wanted a pony, but because she thought Kyubei was full of shit and called his bluff. She left home because she got sick of her mom scolding her. She wound up in Chicago, entered DuPage's platoon at a time when DuPage was still obligated to lead it herself, had a lot of creative differences, ironed them out, became a lieutenant, and was the obvious first choice when the Centurions expanded from 2 to 4. Biography in bullet point. So how had DuPage taught her to lead? Or taught her not to lead? Vaguely curious, which was more curiosity than Hedgewish had about much of anything these days, she stood in the corner of Cicero's refitted motel room and watched her coordinate various subgroups and squads. No more overwrought speeches, they weren't fighting an Archon. In fact, the first thing Hedgewish noticed was that Cicero did not communicate with her soldiers directly. She sat legs crossed in a chair as a pair of Tweedledee and Tweedledum subordinates named Lombard and Elmhurst paced animatedly around her and relayed information via magical radios.
"Berwin team encircling position A," said one. "Darien team has visual on mark B,"
said the other. They drew and erased maps and diagrams on a portable whiteboard mounted to the motel room wall. Someone had enchanted the shitty box television on the dresser and it displayed the point of view of one of the troops in the field.
All teams are standing by,
said either Lombard or Elmhurst. Hedgewish already mixed them.
Your orders, milady.
Cicero contemplated.
Berwin holds. Alsip orients Addison to Mark B. Darien attacks.
The orders were relayed. The precision strike transpired on the television. Darien and 3 other girls burst through a window and pinned a teenager to her bed before she even rose halfway from it.
Flawless, milady,
said Longhurst in unison.
Easy,
muttered Hedgewish. She thought nobody could have possibly heard, but Cicero heard.
It was easy because I made it easy, administrator. Were you not engaged against an enemy you vastly outnumbered? Did you not have an entire night between their first and second attack? I ask you, administrator, why was your situation not easy?
She had any number of excuses. Cube fed her enemies information. Her enemies expected a fight. Her enemies were far stronger than a few random girls in Cincinnati. She didn't care enough to list them aloud. Cicero, however, listed them for her. One by one, each assigned to an outstretched finger.
And I will not claim these weren't reasonable concerns. They were. You were correct to consider them, and I can mention at least 2 centurions who wouldn't have. But your response was idiotic. You understood the incubator was the enemy tactician, yet you assumed a defensive position. You fortified a single area and remained there, motionless. This will never work against an intelligent commander. Given time, they will determine a method to overcome your defenses, and since you refuse to change position, you are giving them as much time as they need. The incubator is a supercomputer, milady.
It wasn't a defense of herself, even. She didn't care what coal Cicero raked her over. She just disliked when someone who didn't know something acted like they knew it.
Time makes no difference to him. If we attacked offensively, he could have calculated a method to defeat us in milliseconds. I considered the resources he had available. You failed to consider the incubator's weaknesses. You placed him upon a pedestal. You respected him too much. Never consider your enemy an idiot, but never consider them a savant, either. The incubator can conceive of a plan in milliseconds, correct, but could he communicate it? Could he convince his subordinates to follow him in that time? There are leaders who succeed via intelligence, strategy. But there are also leaders who succeed because their soldiers have absolute faith in them, who will operate like limbs of a single body, unquestioning, instantaneous. The incubator is incapable of having a relationship of such trust. You could have easily thrown his soldiers into disarray even if you didn't throw him into it. But you refused to even consider this option. You should have attacked, you should have trusted your own soldiers. But you and Joliet were essentially the same, cowards who refused to account for the capabilities of your own subordinates. You are marginally more intelligent than Joliet, so you managed to save her and yourself and one other. But I guarantee, in the exact same situation, with the exact same soldiers, all elements the same, I would have succeeded without a single casualty.
Okay. Hedgewish withdrew from the sliver of investment she had dared put into this conversation. Even if Cicero leaned into it more eagerly, possibly because it finally gave her a chance to display her own intelligence rather than the intelligence the Empress forced her to regurgitate. Lombard and Elmhurst acted proper sycophants and Hedgewish said nothing. The operation resumed and Berwin team captured its mark. Then Cicero tried to jump-start it again.
Remember always,
she said, unbidden, randomly,
you took command and 18 girls died. Let that specter haunt you, never exorcise it, no matter what success you may find in your future. To dwell on it would only make me more timid. Milady. Then you would have learned the wrong lesson. But since you said that, I know you didn't.
There were no lessons. only correct things to say to end a conversation, and Hedwig found one. Cicero did not bother to teach Hedwig afterward and narrowed her concentration on the mission. The 7 Cincinnati girls, once captured, were led into the motel lobby, where Cicero met them, attended by her Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Hedwig in the back near the motel owner, who concealed no delight at the officious formality of the proceedings. Cicero demanded the girls kneel, and although some glared, they all did. The elementary girl vibrated with fear and even started to plead, "Please don't kill," terminated by Cicero's terse command for silence. The silence hovered. Cicero presided, tallest woman in the room by seemingly an entire 2 feet, and regarded each face in turn. More than just the elementary student trembled. Few met her gaze. The silence stretched. Hedwig checked her watch. Sorry.
Her chronometer. So fascinating, said the motel owner, more rings than fingers and even more bird dipper toys on her desk. Are you in their club?
The motel owner was allowed to talk. Hedwig was not. So Hedwig only looked at the bird dippers as they dipped up, dipped down.
The metropolis of Cincinnati, said Cicero finally, including its various sub- and exurban satellites, has fallen under the Inquisition of the Holy Order of Chicago, claimed in the name of its munificent empress, and as such shall henceforth be referred to as the territory of Cincinnati, and its government shall be colonial in nature.
Nobody knew what that meant.
Which of you is the primary Puella Magi of this region?
Cicero already knew. Denver's file on the girl included a picture rated from the selfie board. Clown muffle meter, 4 out of 10. The question was whether the girl would announce it herself or wait for her 6 fellows to turn their gazes toward her. She chose the former.
Me. I, said Cicero, the Empress's stalwart paladin, 2nd Centurion Cicero, am now your superior, so you shall address me as milady.
A frigid pause.
Milady. Correct. And you have inhabited this city how long? 5 months as head, 2 years as not. 1 week in Detroit.
Cicero remained solid. Fixed. A statue. She said,
I failed to hear you. 2.5 years. I do not hear those who do not provide the respect due my station.
Cincinnati's face scrunched. She probably didn't care about groveling. But the motel owner's gleeful giggle struck her in the gut. Embarrassment. To blather such idiocy in view of a normal human. Shame. Possibly an intentional tactic by Cicero. Hedwig had heard Cicero eschewed corporal punishment of misbehaving cadets. She preferred more creative measures of coercion. Rationally, it made sense, because magical girls dampened pain, so force mattered less if it weren't lethal. But Hedwig the bookkeeper peered into her mental copy of Cicero's newly declassified file, into the years she spent first as a grunt in DuPage's platoon and then as DuPage's second, and had to wonder what sorts of coercion DuPage undertook. A girl who conjured despair. She transformed that despair into wraiths normally, but could she wield it physically, transfer it into the soul of another the way Hedwig could? Hedwig blinked, the ritual had resumed. Cincinnati must have stooped, for now Cicero fractured her statuesque posture to pace before the 7 kneeling captives, head tilted so her chin reached the same level of her nose.
The Empress, in her infinite munificence, extends an offer toward each of you, one you are at perfect liberty to accept or deny. Her offer, in its entirety, is so, you may maintain your stations in this metropolis, as members of its new territorial government. In fact, your status within these regional bounds will not even diminish, thus, the Puella Magi now known as Cincinnati will become the governor of Cincinnati, a rank only beneath that of the centurions.
She spoke this jargon as though everyone understood it crystal and clear. She turned on a jagged heel and nearly wrenched up a tuft of carpet.
The empire will not even require of you a tithe or tribute in the form of some percentage of your grief cube intake. No, the only condition the empress demands in return for her generous terms is your pledged fealty to the empire and recognition of the empress as your suzerain.
She ended on the most bogus word of all, and this pause was less silent as the 7 captives looked to each other in hopes that any of them knew what a suzerain was. One girl hazarded a guess.
You mean we say you're the boss and you let us stay here like before?
Cicero stood, arms crossed, regarding a tacky still life of pears on the wall.
Milady,
the girl added.
Correct. And as our tributary state, you will also be subject to certain benefits. For instance, in the event of a foreign puella magi entering the metropolis with aims to usurp its current rule, the empire's might will rally to your defense and assure stability. Nomads and marauders will be forced well past the city's walls. Cube famines will be supplanted with reserves from the empire's bounteous stores. And your highest representative will have a voice in certain matters regarding the empire's internal statutes.
The general mood of the captives lifted. Some of those benefits sounded good. But a wiser one added.
What's the catch, milady? Or do you just want to decorate a map with thumbtacks? You must want something from us too, right?
Cicero began to detail the empire's many prohibitions and expected modes of conduct. The smiles faded, not into frowns, but into befuddlement. Did the empire go through all this trouble of conquest only to turn them into Jehovah's Witnesses?
And,
added Cicero,
if the empire goes to war, you must bolster its ranks.
More discontent. Magical girls had enough of their own battles to fight someone else's.
You may accept these terms or deny them,
said Cicero.
If you deny them, you will not be harmed in any way. However, you will be forced to depart this city and any other city under the empire's dominion. As of the last report this morning, this dominion includes Greater Chicago, Greater Milwaukee, Greater Minneapolis, Greater St. Louis, Greater Indianapolis, Greater Louisville, and Greater Detroit.
It was true. Somehow, Cook took down Detroit in one day. Detroit had nearly as many magical girls as Cook's platoon, but she did it. When Cicero heard the news, her eye twitched several seconds before she steadied it, and her only verbal response was, "Well." Now, however, she listed it with the same dryness as the others.
Upon hypothetical refusal, the empire will supply one of its own soldiers to take your place, so it's only a moderate concern of ours.
The coup de grace. If the empire sent stooges to stay in Cincinnati, it would limit the freedom of the girls who lived there. So anyone planning on staying would now want the other 6 to stay too. Peer pressure. Cicero really planned this one out. Or did the empress give her a script to recite? Cicero had always seemed like the empress's chief automaton, but Hedwig considered she might have her own brand of ingenuity buried beneath the stilted syntax. Ultimately, all 7 girls agreed to swear fealty. Many seemed to regret their decision when Cicero ordered Lombard and Elmhurst to retrieve from the bus the Empress's life-size portrait before which they were expected to prostrate themselves and give an oath. The motel owner nearly choked in hysterics. Afterward, Hedwig actually had to do work. She ran each of the 7 through the same question-and-answer spiel she gave all new recruits and chronicled their key information on both paper forms and the hunk-a-junk laptop they gave her. She wondered whether she would need to also take the information for the girls Cook and Aurora captured. The answer was yes. And she had to do it by phone. Smushed in the back of Cicero's bus, legs bent against the seat in front of her with the attaché case perched atop them to form a makeshift table. She shouted at girls from Detroit and then Louisville over the purr of the motor and the chatter of Cicero's platoon. Cincinnati conquered, so it was on to the next one, and the next one was Columbus. They planned to reach it before dusk, commandeer a base of operations, and attack the next morning. Hedgewish imagined surprise tactics would work less. Word of the Empire's eastward roll must have leaked by now, even with Magnet off the web. The bus hit a bump. Hedgewish's pen punctured the paper and stabbed her attaché case. Fuck. She inspected her attaché case for a mark, but the black ink did not show on the black leather. She stared at the little indentation the pen type made and stared, and as she stared her mind wandered into the depression into the black leather, and she thought of the names chronicled of all the girls and all the girls chronicled in that semblance of heaven, and her hands went taut and the pen slipped through her fingers. No. No. Back away. Back away. Calumet. Hazel Crest. Denver. Not her fault. Let that specter haunt you. Fuck you, Cicero. Fuck you, fuck Cicero. You took command and 18 girls died. And she knew all their names, ages, wishes, dreams, the people they wanted to be, their ideals, all of it, in her little spreadsheet, and after the fact she had to retrieve the file of each and mark it deceased. Her chest tightened, her eyes blurred, then like a sensation of faintness when the blood rushes out of your head it passed, she sat back, she breathed. It didn't matter. It didn't matter, they died and they didn't matter. This world fucked them, not Hedgewish. This world and its fucked up system, where those who suffer most get rewarded simply for suffering. If the world didn't work like that, then maybe they wouldn't have had to suffer. Hedgewish didn't make them suffer more than they had been destined to suffer the moment they wished their silly wishes. Okay.
You drop this, milady.
A minimal hand held her pen. The hand belonged to Midlothian. Hedgewish took the pen. She wrote, under country of birth, Philippines. Unfortunately, Midlothian sat next to her.
I am occupied,
said Hedgewish.
I know.
Seated, she was close enough to whisper.
I won't take long. I just want to say, thank you. You saved my life. Flossmoor and Palos too, and Lady Joliet. Thank you.
Midlothian bowed her head, rose, and hurried back to her seat. Hedgewish wrote, underage, 11. They arrived in Columbus. Some fringe suburb, anyway. Cicero set her bloodhounds Hinsdale and Hodgkins on the trail of local girls while Lombard and Elmhurst oversaw the unloading of relevant supplies from the bus. Hedgewish and Lieutenant Berwin handled the acquisition of lodging. Berwin leaned over the counter and effected a jaunty arch in her lumber, teetered on toe tips as she jostled her enormous circular glasses and grinned.
Salutations, sir. Have you perchance a handful of vacancies in this establishment?
This rotund, pinball-head man lacked the glitzy aplomb of the motel owner from Cincinnati. Shirt sleeves rolled until they could no longer squeeze past the slabs of his upper arms. He averted his stare from a handheld device upon which a droll video played. Wacky sound effects continued as he sized up Berwin and her attaché case-carrying companion and said,
"We have a vacancy." "My fine fellow, I've gathered so much already, unless your lighted sign in the parking lot deceived. But mayhap you misheard, vacancies, I asked, plural. I've 20 friends in search of warm beds."
21, intoned Hedgewish.
21 thank you, Thank you friend Hedgewish. 21 plus myself, that's 22. Thus I ask, as to the total number of vacancies.
The man stared, mouth half open. A banana peel slipping sound played.
22, girls. Aye. We're exceptional pupils of St. Ursula's School for Young Females in Chicago, Illinois. A school trip, a convention, prospective collegiate opportunities, quite the excitement.
She let a hand flip over onto its back so that it hung lazily on her wrist.
What say you, good gentlemen? Our school will compensate our expenses.
Based on the parking lot, the lodging existed. The man rolled the fat on his neck to tilt his head. Spring, went his device. If necessary, Cicero's platoon had a girl named River Forest whose power reduced one's capacity for rational thought. With her, it would not only be trivial to convince the man to allow them to stay but also barter a discount. Cicero doubted the former reason would prove necessary, and considered the latter immoral, so they had left her with the others, to use only as a last resort. Berwin herself seemed capable of reducing reason. One leg folded up until her heel nearly touched her ass and her foot revolved in slow circles along its ball joint. She giggled and stuck her tongue out at the man, twisted and chewed a lock of her dark hair. But the man was insensible to her wiles. His focus fell on their white suits, then Hedgewish's attaché case.
Yes, sure. The rates.
After they finalized the transaction, Berwin hugged Hedgewish hard enough to lift her off the ground, squeezed until Hedgewish could no longer breathe, and eventually released her.
Excellent work, Lady Administrator.
Hedgewish said 2 words the whole time, depending on whether you counted the hyphen. Afterward, Berwin got called to a strategy meeting with Cicero and the platoon's lesser authority figures, including the might-as-well-be twins, Addison and Darien. Hedgewish wasn't invited, although her Columbus files were readily accepted. Darien, the girl with the gigantic sword who rescued Hedgewish from the slugs in the seaside restaurant, had no current rank, but her youth and ability indicated she had a bright future in the Empire. Everyone knew Cicero had been grooming her with the aim of making her a lieutenant, possibly even a centurion in a few years. After all, if Cicero had a flaw in the context of imperial dogma, it had to be the individual inferiority of her soldiers. Cicero herself could be the strongest, staunchest, smartest, swiftest, anathema to the material sins rumored to plague her senior centurions, reading the books the Empress liked, saying the speeches in words the Empress liked to hear, but in many ways her undying ability hampered that of those beneath her. The hands-off style of DuPage had given real leadership experience to her lieutenants, so that 2 were now centurions and another the governor of Milwaukee. Cicero had suffered mediocre Berwin since the start. Nobody else in Cicero's platoon had accomplished anything that wasn't an accomplishment of Cicero first and foremost. Darien was the hope to stifle that trend, but Hedgewish had no first-hand experience to tell if Darien actually had potential or if it were mere hype. She knew nothing about Darien, honestly. Just her name, age, country of birth, wish, date contracted, previous occupations, previous living arrangements, virginity status, sexuality, weight. She stopped in front of her motel door. Wasn't Darien from? Hedgewish sifted her attaché case and retrieved Darien's file. She read and reread the history to confirm what she had already memorized. But when she first memorized it 5 months prior, it held no relevance. Now, a circumstance had changed. There, Darien spent her first 3 months as a magical girl in none other than San Bernardino, California. The twin cities of Murrieta and Temecula, to be exact. Given the timeline, she must have been the girl called Murrieta Temecula right before Paulus took the mantle. She couldn't tell whether this coincidence mattered. Clown Muffle probably forgot Darien existed, although the same couldn't be said the other way around. Still, who even was Darien? A name in a paper. An austere girl with intense eyes and short hair. Hedwig had never spoken to her except during her initial interview. Shrugging to herself, she slid the file back into her attaché case. Meaningless. Upon the push of a keycard, her door unlocked and she stepped inside. Her room was not unoccupied. 2 girls were inside. They were not members of Cicero's platoon. They were not members of Chicago. They weren't even girls from Columbus, although they were assuredly magical girls. Hedwig blinked, she recognized one of the pair, although she couldn't place the face. The one she recognized sat cross-legged atop the bed farthest from the door. Her chin rested on a thatch of interlaced fingers. Her eyelids were closed serenely, she seemed to meditate. She wore a cape, light armor, mostly around her tits, and an uneven skirt expertly perched upon her folded legs. Blue color scheme. Blue hair. Who did Hedwig know with blue hair? The other, at the lampstand in the corner, rocked in a chair and devoured a plate of cheese.
Lila,
said the first, eyes unopened.
Nice to meet ya. Heard a lot about you.
It clicked.
Sayaka. Mickey.
Madoka Kaname's best friend. Before someone else strong-armed the title.
You died. You became a witch. In the world you know about, yeah. But in this world witches don't exist. Something else happens to magical girls whose souls become corrupted.
Hedwig draped her attaché case on the unoccupied bed and stood at its foot. She made sure to keep something between her and Sayaka, and rested a wary eye on the cheese eater.
No need for all the tension.
Sayaka opened her eyes, bounced off the mattress, nearly hit her head on the ceiling but didn't, and landed atop the rounded knob of a wooden post at her bed's corner. She perched there and leaned forward until her face was level with Hedwig's again.
You already have a good idea who I am, so let me introduce my partner. Nagisa. Quit stuffing your face already and let's do what we came here for.
Nagisa ceased funneling food into her mouth to whine.
But come on. You don't need me for this anyway. We're representatives of Madoka. If we look bad, she looks bad, and right now you look really bad, got it?
A forked wedge of Gouda already in her mouth, she said,
Why you look bad? Forget her.
Sayaka stepped off the bedpost, sprawled off the bed, and landed on her heels with her hands clasped behind her back. She wobbled back and forth, although it was clear from her positioning she wanted to block Hedwig's view of her partner.
You and I have some stuff to talk about.
The whole time Hedwig had watched with stupefaction. Finally given the chance, she expelled the pent-up breath in her chest, pulled off her ring, and tossed it onto the bed.
Fine. Go ahead.
At first, Sayaka didn't seem to understand. Then she burst out laughing.
Give me a break. You really think I'd come all this way to do something like that? I know you got some kind of problem with Madoka, but seriously? You think we're a hit squad? I hoped,
said Hedwig, putting the ring back on.
Madoka isn't even that upset with you,
Sayaka continued,
relatively speaking. Yeah, you made some mistakes, and knowing what you know you really oughta have known better, but she's forgiven way worse than you before. You know how she is.
Hedwig remembered her look when she came to retrieve Calumet and Hazel Crest. She could debate the point, but the point was moot. It had happened, whether Hedwig should have done it or not.
And sure, I could yammer on about what a big idiot you are, and how many mistakes you've made despite having a better understanding of the way this universe works than most, but I'm not here for that either. How are they? Calumet and Hazel Crest. Karen and Miyuki are doing great. We're doing our best to get them accommodated, and we got another of yours too, Chelsea.
Chelsea had to mean Griffith.
Things have changed in the past few days, so there's been a shake-up for everyone, but you do what you gotta, right?
She swayed, she tapped her heels, she jostled the hilt of her sword and caused it to clink. Nagisa scarfed in the background. It was all very animated, all very lively, and Hedgewish had to work herself up to the question.
And Denver? Denver. Miss Sage Reese. Yup. We got her too. Weird situation with all those souls in one gem, but we made sure to untangle M. To tangle them again in a different gem. Yeah, you could look at it like that, but look at me. I'm part of the law of the cycles just like them and I'm still myself. Look. I get you got misgivings, but I'm telling you, it's really not bad at all.
Hedgewish smiled.
You didn't answer my question. How's Denver?
Sayaka quit swaying. But she, too, was smiling.
1. You didn't ask how she was before. And 2. If you don't quit that annoying habit of asking questions without saying them like they're a question, I'm gonna pretend you're not asking any questions at all.
Another witty evasion. Hedgewish remembered Denver, at the end. Tired, worn. Saying it was okay. She wanted out of where she was, and Hedgewish did the worst thing possible and put her into the frying pan instead.
Look.
Sayaka hammocked her head in her hands as she bent back to matrix levels of absurdity. Her movements, she reminded Hedgewish of someone, but today was the day people sparked a memory and the spark fizzled.
Sage is gonna be fine. We even considered sending her to talk to you instead, but she's still too new for a sensitive job like this. Course if I knew how useless my actual partner was gonna wind up being, I might have asked for Sage anyway.
Nagisa stuck out a tongue.
But man, look at me. Talking and never getting to the point. Guess that'll happen. So let's cut to the quick and start on a more direct foot, yeah? First thing, you, Lila, are supposed to be dead.
Did this flighty bitch want Hedgewish's ring or not? Hedgewish had started to remember the things she knew about the illustrious Miss Mickey, and those things were not pretty. The idea that someone could fall into fatal despair over a fucking boy was so cutely petty that it transcended pathetic and became a sad stereotype of the teenage female. Fantastic person to lecture Hedgewish over what happened in Chicago. Hopefully the tactical meeting would end early so Berwin could show up and end this farce. But the less terrible people never showed up when the truly terrible ones demanded your attention, and Sayaka continued uninterrupted.
By that I mean, like, in the cosmic fate sort of way. Not whether you deserve to be dead or not, that's a different argument, and honestly I'd say, you don't.
Oh thanks Sayaka.
Being basically God, Madoka exists outside of time and thus knows all that has ever happened and all that ever will, as if she's seeing the entire timeline at the same time? Get that? I know this kinda stuff's not the easiest to wrap your head around, haha. But basically, you should have died in Chicago yesterday. It was fated to happen. Karma, maybe that's a better word. Then why don't you kill me already? I swear I don't mind.
Sayaka rolled her eyes.
Oh please. You don't mean that, or it'd show in your soul gem. Anyway, it's not even a major problem that you're alive. At least it's not a problem now. You can keep on living a full natural life and you're not going to do anything too important one way or another.
Oh. Thanks Sayaka.
But you see, the problem is you're not the only alive person who shoulda died. Let's see, there's you. Your friend Charlie, of course, she started the whole thing, Hannah, and one more, the big one. Christine.
Charlie was Clown Muffle. Hannah was Midlothian. Christine, of course, was the progeny of their dear Empress, Joliet. What other given name would she have?
So,
said Hedgewish,
any idea why 4 people who were cosmically fated to die should be alive? Yeah, well...
Sayaka nudged the television stand with her boothiel.
I don't wanna blame you, because this time you really did have the right intentions, so let's just say that Madoka did something she shouldn't have, and you were the one who asked her to do it.
Hedgewish closed her eyes, of course. She should have expected from the onset. When she convinced Madoka not to take Clown Muffle away via cycles, to let Hedgewish siphon her despair instead. That was it. A turning point in cosmic fate.
That's right. Your friend Charlie was past the threshold where the law of the cycles should have taken her, but you saved her instead. And because a law of the universe got broken, all bets were off. The timeline completely rewrote itself after that moment. And it just so happens that it rewrote itself in a very, very, very bad way.
To a point it made sense. Without an alive Clown Muffle, Hedgewish, Midlothian, and Joliet all would have died in Chicago. But her sheer indomitable will kept them alive in a hopeless situation. Nagisa shrieked. Sayaka drew her blade and 4 more flashed under her fluttering cloak as she wheeled around in combat stance and roved her eyes wildly in search of some combatant. None existed, but out of Nagisa's mound of cheese had emerged a white, fluffy head. So that's the explanation. Although I knew that the law of the cycles was originally a human named Madoka Kaname, I expected that upon ascension to conceptual entity, her free will would become a moot point. I'm afraid I must express disappointment with how irresponsible this goddess of yours has acted.
Look buddy, we know well enough ourselves,
said Sayaka. Nagisa recovered from her astonishment and prodded Kyubei with her fork. It had always been a certainty that if Miss Luce were allowed to pursue her ambitions, it would result in a cataclysmic reversal of this planet's fortunes. And while certain circumstances made it necessary to concentrate particularly powerful magical girls with a specific set of unique skills under her dominion, I always had a contingency plan to neutralize her while expending minimal resources. Were it not for the unexpected abatement of the law of the cycles, my plan would have. Sayaka pointed her sword at him.
Don Cha think a plan that relies on so many tiny things happening exactly a certain way is prone to fail. Especially if that plan relies on Clown Muffle of all people dying,
said Hedgewish. Even if Miss Viscara survived, which I did not expect, I had the backup plan of causing the creation of an Archon to ensure the younger Miss Luce's death. The problem was that not only did she survive, but another unexpected thing occurred. You, Miss Chatterjee, took command in Miss Luce's stead. And while you were not an adept commander, your formulation of any plan at all ran counter to my expectations. Truthfully, I had expected you would flee before the fighting even commenced in earnest. Hedgewish leaned against the door and drummed her fingers upon the dull iron handle. Fleeing, yeah, that was probably what she herself would have expected she would do. And why hadn't she?
That's your whole problem, Furball,
said Sayaka.
You always underestimate we silly humans. Maybe if you would realize we're not all as dumb as you think, you wouldn't be, what, 0 for 3 in big cosmic fuck-ups right now.
I'm more inclined to believe that Miss Chatterjee's encounter with the law of the cycles that night influenced her in some way. But while these errors in my calculations must be accounted for in future plans, discussing them will not bring us any closer to the resolution of our current predicament.
Yeah,
said Hedgewish.
So how about you two sort out how to solve this big mess? I'll be anywhere else.
In uncanny, unnatural unison, so that afterward Sayaka shot Kyubei an almost disgusted glare. Kyubei's expression did not change. The two of them said,
"Because we need you."
Well, Kyubei thought it, but that only made their synchronicity all the more disconcerting.
Why?
After a hesitant pause, in which Sayaka waited to make sure Kyubei wouldn't echo her again, she said,
"Because right now you're probably our best bet to rewrite it back the way it should be."
Dubious.
"For real,"
said Sayaka,
"it's true." "Well, you know a certain someone in a high place. The Empress. Millicent, whatever she wants to be called. But yeah. You're probably the only person she'll listen to. The only person who can convince her not to do the thing she's currently planning on doing. She thinks you're an emissary of God, and whether that's true or not, if you tell her God doesn't want her doing what she's doing, maybe she'll actually buy it. If I told her, she'd just say, 'Who the hell are you?'"
The simplest and most effective solution would be to ensure the death of Christine Luce, her daughter. However, that objective can no longer be achieved with high certainty of success, as the defenses surrounding her have increased significantly and the resources at my disposal grow thinner and thinner. There simply does not exist a force strong enough in this region. Although I must wonder why the multitudinous number of souls within the law of the cycles could not render trivial this problem with a single concerted strike on the priority targets.
Because we're not murderers.
If not murder, then why not prematurely take Christine Luce via the law of the cycles? If Madoka Kaname is capable of suspending a universal law on a whim, then certainly.
That's murder. That's murder, verbal. Taking someone before their time.
Even if it were murder, as you say, it would prevent a terrible calamity. Is the life of one human being prized so highly? Nobody else would need to die. Not even the mother. Without Christine Luce, nothing can be achieved.
That's not even true. We know a lot more than you do. There are other problems than just Christine.
Regardless, the death of Christine Luce would cause her mother to abandon her ambitions. That much is at least correct.
Yeah, but you're missing the point.
This conversation no longer seemed to concern Hedgewish at all, despite their protests to the contrary. She stood in it, limp, worthless, a tertiary actor on its periphery, an extra with her face half obscured by a carelessly placed prop.
"Madoka's killed before,"
Hedgewish said.
"I saw it. Mami Tomoe. In order to save a life." "You can bet,"
said Sayaka, fingers gripped around the edges of the table, her casual demeanor sapped, a sharp arched twist in her eyebrows.
"You can bet we've discussed all these things and more among ourselves up there. If you want a more practical reason, then let's say that if Madoka breaking the law of the cycles once caused something unexpectedly awful to happen, then us running around and killing people might spark something even worse."
Perhaps if you were willing to coordinate with me, we could calculate the exact outcome of such an action.
We're definitely not working with you. We know if you get the chance, you'll try to capture her or worse. Don't you have a friend who can turn back time?
Said Hedgewish.
Or did she die in this universe?
Sayaka wheeled around.
We're definitely not working with her.
Hedgewish shrugged. All right. Let's just go around having every moral quibble possible so we can let something awful happen to the whole world. Let's be afraid, because we messed up something by meddling once, that if we meddle again it'll only get worse. Hedgewish wanted to fling in their faces, of all things, Cicero's words, not to grow timid from failure, to move forward and strike with boldness, because it seemed clear that the solution to this obnoxiously vague calamity was to kill Joliet, so they ought to just fucking do that. Who was even calling the shots in the law of the cycles? Because Madoka would kill. If it meant protecting something she cared about, she would strike down even someone she considered a friend. Even if it tore her apart inside, she would do it, and she would not hesitate. But Sayaka Miki, whose altruism refused to bend, even when the winds of the world battered against her, who spiraled into self-destruction only to prove a point about righteousness, this adamant refusal sounded more like her wheelhouse. Had the souls in the law of the cycles actually discussed this like Sayaka said? If so, had Madoka been cowed to the sight of blindness by the impassioned arguments of someone far more pig-headed? Hedgewish could imagine it. She could imagine that stupid, useless god listening to this drivel.
I don't get what's got everyone so worked up,
said Nagisa. She had given up on her cheese, it had fur in it.
Right now there's a chance Lila can solve everything without violence. If that doesn't work, then we can think about what to do next.
Somehow, she spoke sense. Sayaka's body sagged, swiveled like a tin figure on a jerky mechanism, until she stood straight and arms crossed.
Right.
The plan with the highest chance of success should be pursued first.
Nobody's asking you. We didn't even invite you to this meeting and you don't know the half of it.
Sayaka swept across the room, took Hedgewish in confidentially, and whispered,
He doesn't know the half of it. If he ever says you need to do something, just remember we're past his area of expertise.
Hedgewish had to imagine they were past anyone's area of expertise now. Sayaka drew away, cape aflutter, flopping back onto the bed Hedgewish decided would belong to Berwin, bouncing back flowing like liquid over its edge and onto the floor, at which point she kicked herself back upright with a flurry of whirlwind leg motions. The movement, it reminded Hedgewish of someone. She kept wanting to say Clown Muffle, but it wasn't Clown Muffle. Clown Muffle was airy and buoyant, Sayaka was liquid and angles, but who had it been that moved this way? She stared. Sayaka gave a sheepish grin.
Sorry, whenever I get a chance to come down here I gotta stretch my legs a bit you know. Anyway, where were we? Okay. Yeah. We're running low on time, but right now, all you need to do is convince your Empress Lady, Millie Luce, convince her to stop doing what she's doing.
The idea that this conversation might end revivified Hedgewish a little and she said,
Why should I? I don't know what she's doing and I see her hardly never and I doubt I have as much influence as you seem to think. I don't know what this big catastrophe is and you've described it in the most generic terms possible. Why should I care? I'd rather not do this tap dance again.
The catastrophe in question.
Just trust us, it's bad.
More urgent. Abrupt. Cutting Kyubei off.
You're better off not knowing the specifics. Lots of people will die, that should tell you all you need to know. Lots, like, millions.
Bullshit. No, seriously, bullshit. If they wanted to make her care, they should know they needed specificity. They could calculate her emotions and actions to the slimmest margin, so they ought to know what would convince her and what wouldn't. Wasting time could hardly be an excuse given how much time they already wasted. Why not tell her? Wouldn't it help her prevent it if she knew what she was trying to prevent? She wouldn't be surprised in all their plotting and planning they forgot about Lila Chatterjee the person, and honestly she could not blame them because she wished she could forget about herself. But something in Sayaka's tone.
Look! You're going to speak to your Empress again before she puts her plan into effect. When there's still a chance to stop her, she'll ask to speak to you, because whether you believe her or not she's got some inner conflict herself and she sees you as a way to resolve it. Normally, you wouldn't say anything. You would tell her exactly what she wants to hear and get out as fast as you can. But we need you, Lila. We need you to tell her what you know is right, because you're a good person, Lila, despite everything you tell yourself to the contrary, and the mistakes you've made, you're a good person. Madoka believes in you, and so do I. So please, to save thousands, millions of lives, will you do this?
To get out as fast as she could, Hedwig told her exactly what she wanted to hear and said,
yes. I don't believe her,
said Nagisa. I suspect she's lying, said Kyubei.
Yeah, I'm sure she's lying.
Sayaka kicked at nothing.
But I think, given what we've told her, when she does meet the Empress again, she'll come to see things differently. She's not as bad a person as she likes to think.
I'd rather not stake the viable production rate of this planet on something so tenuous. I've prepared a backup plan. While I must admit its odds of success are less than half, they are still high enough to make the gamble worthwhile. At least I gleaned some useful information from this conversation. Kyubei burrowed back into Nagisa's cheese and vanished. Nagisa no longer looked too eager to eat.
Kyubei has no clue how bad things are gonna get, said Sayaka. Ignore anything he says, honestly, we all should know that by now. Lila, please. I know you don't like us. I know you don't like me, or even Madoka. I know you don't think this world, this system is perfect. I know you think Madoka's an idiot for not making it better. But just because the world's flawed doesn't mean you should give up on it. It's easy to act all detached like you don't give a damn about anything, it's easy to do that and cover up everything you don't like. But if you do that you're hurting someone else. Kyubei wants you not to care. Everyone who wants to hurt you wants you not to care, wants you to let them do it. Just remember that.
The speech was timed perfectly because at the final word Hedwig heard footsteps approach the door and the rattle of a keycard entering a slot. Sayaka danced back, yanked Nagisa out of her chair, and drew her cloak over them both. When the cloak fluttered to the ground, both Sayaka and Nagisa had disappeared. Berwin entered.
"Hello Poppet, now well isn't this a cozy chamber?" "That's your bed,"
Hedwig pointed.
"Rightio. What's this you got here?"
She stooped and grabbed Sayaka's discarded cloak.
"Oh. This is so cool. Is this yours?" "The last guest must have left it." "Then you don't mind if I, procure it for myself, do you?"
Berwin slung it around her shoulders and examined herself in the tall mirror on the bathroom door.
"It doesn't adhere to dress code,"
Hedwig intoned.
"It'll be our little secret. After all, wouldn't want anyone learning about your secret activities in the shower, I Poppet."
What a cute bluff. Hedwig never did anything in the shower except stare at her feet. End of chapter. Chapter end.